Imagine, for just a second, the absolute sensory overload of it all. You know, you are 23 years old, and you have just signed a contract that wires $50 million directly into your bank account.
Oh, it is a massive shock to the system.
Right. You immediately start living the life that everyone else is just, scrolling past on social media. You are smelling the fresh, hand-stitched leather inside a fleet of imported supercars sitting in the driveway of a 20,000 square foot compound.
Yeah, the dream.
Exactly. You have the private jet tarmac waiting for you. You have an entourage of like 20 people on your payroll just nodding at every single word you say. And yet, less than 5 years later, you are standing in a courtroom, completely bankrupt.
It happens so fast.
It really does.
Yeah.
The cars are repossessed, the compound is in foreclosure, that whole entourage has just vanished into thin air, and the IRS is placing liens on your future earnings for the rest of your life. We see this exact scenario play out constantly with world-famous athletes, chart-topping musicians, and A-list actors.
It is a devastatingly common trajectory, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And it stands in absolute stark contrast to the other extreme of the wealth spectrum.
Exactly, because on the exact flip side of that coin, you have these invisible millionaires.
Right, the people you'd never suspect.
Yeah, we are talking about the person living right next door to you in a totally unassuming mid-century ranch house. They are driving a 14-year-old Toyota. They mow their own lawn.
Probably wearing New Balances.
Probably. And yet, beneath that completely average surface, they are quietly sitting on an 8-figure balance sheet. They are structuring multi-generational trusts and building this economic fortress that is going to last for centuries. Why is there such a massive, catastrophic difference between those two realities?
Well, it fundamentally comes down to a complete misunderstanding of what wealth actually is. I mean, the people going bankrupt are treating wealth as a verb, an action of spending and displaying. But the invisible millionaires, they treat wealth as a noun. It's an accumulation of working assets. The difference lies in the fact that wealth is not about your top-line revenue. It is entirely about what you keep and, the architectural precision of how you structure what you keep.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that distinction is the entire reason we are here today. The Wealthnetic mission for this deep dive is to completely deconstruct the financial architecture of the ultra-wealthy.
We're getting into the nuts and bolts.
Exactly. We are going way beyond the basic, save 10% of your paycheck advice. We are going to examine the psychology, the precise cash flow mechanics, and the complex asset allocation secrets used by billionaire family offices.
And there is a real science to it.
There is. And the goal is to translate those institutional strategies into an actionable roadmap that you, the listener, can apply to your own balance sheet. Because whether you are already managing a high net worth portfolio or you are just beginning to scale your journey toward true financial freedom, the mechanical rules of the game remain exactly the same.
And we are pulling from a really heavy-hitting stack of institutional intelligence today to build this roadmap. I mean, we are synthesizing global wealth data from Altrata, liquidity and portfolio architecture insights from InvestBank, and proprietary private banking reports from Citi Private Bank.
Right, and we are not stopping at just high-level theory. We are looking at advanced expert tax mitigation frameworks from CMP and the Financial Planning Association, specific cash flow models from Pantheon Investments, and marrying all of that mathematical strategy with the timeless behavioral finance lessons from Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money and Thomas J. Stanley's classic, The Millionaire Next Door.
It's a massive lineup.
It is. Plus, we are going to do a mechanical autopsy on how celebrity financial disasters actually happen. So let's start at the absolute foundation. We have to draw a hard line in the sand between looking rich and actually being wealthy.
Yeah, and that line is perfectly drawn in The Millionaire Next Door. Stanley and Danko, they did this massive sociological and financial study of affluent Americans, and they discovered that society fundamentally conflates income with wealth.
Which is such an easy trap to fall into.
It really is. So they categorize high earners into two distinct groups, the income affluent and the balance sheet affluent.
Okay, so the income affluent being the people who have a massive W-2 salary. Maybe they are pulling in $500,000 or $600,000 a year, but their actual net worth is shockingly low relative to that income.
Precisely. The authors coined an acronym for them, UAWs, or under accumulators of wealth.
UAWs, okay.
Or conversely, the balance sheet affluent are the PAWs, the prodigious accumulators of wealth. These are individuals who might earn, significantly less on an annual basis, but they capture and compound a massive percentage of that income into a formidable net worth.
Now, I know there is a specific benchmark formula in the source material to determine exactly which category you fall into. And for anyone listening right now who likes hard numbers, let's actually run the math.
Oh, it is a ruthless formula, but it is incredibly effective for diagnosing your financial efficiency.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so you take your current age, you multiply it by your realized pre-tax annual household income from all sources, and we are excluding any inheritances here, and then you divide that total number by 10.
Divide by 10, okay.
Right. The resulting figure is what your net worth should be right now, at a minimum.
Let's do a stress test on that to make sure the mechanics are clear for everyone. Let's look at a 45-year-old law partner.
Good example.
Let's say this partner is generating $800,000 a year in pre-tax income. So we take 45, multiply it by 800,000, which gives us 36 million.
Correct.
We divide that by 10 and we get $3.6 million. According to the benchmark, this 45-year-old earning 800K should have a baseline net worth of $3.6 million.
Exact.
So if they have 5 million, they are a PAW. But if they only have 1.2 million, they are officially a UAW.
Exactly. And this is where the data becomes incredibly counterintuitive. You would naturally assume that specialized physicians, corporate executives, and high-powered attorneys people generating $500,000 to $1 million a year would automatically be prodigious accumulators of wealth.
Right, because they have the ultimate wealth-building tool, a massive shovel.
Exactly. But the research explicitly shows that these specific high-income professions fall into the UAW trap at disproportionately high rates.
Hold on, let me stop you there. I am looking at this logically, and it just seems contradictory. High income is the primary engine of wealth creation. If you are making $800,000 a year, how is it mathematically possible to be an underaccumulator? Are they just incredibly bad at investing?
Well, no, it is not an investing knowledge gap. It is a consumption trap driven by intense sociological pressure. First, you have the structural disadvantage of delayed starts.
Oh, like medical school.
Exactly. A specialized surgeon or a partner at a law firm spends their entire 20s and early 30s accumulating massive educational debt instead of compounding assets. By the time they hit their peak earning years, they are mathematically a decade behind a business owner who started at 22.
I can see the structural delay, sure. But if you are making $800K at age 40, you should be able to close that 10-year gap in about 36 months if you just aggressively allocate capital. So there has to be something else straining the system.
There is. This is where we get into what Stanley calls the better than and better off theories. American society has prescribed a highly specific, highly visible lifestyle for these professions.
Like the uniform of success.
Yeah, exactly. When a surgeon achieves a certain status, there is an unspoken but intense societal expectation regarding how they are supposed to live. They're expected to buy into the prestigious zip code. They're expected to join the right country clubs, send their children to the $50,000 a year private schools, and drive imported luxury sedans.
So they are falling victim to the better than theory, measuring their success by visibly outconsuming their peers. It's keeping up with the Joneses, but the Joneses are other neurosurgeons, so the price of admission is astronomical.
Exactly. And it is compounded by the better off theory. This applies specifically to high earners who grew up in working class or economically insecure environments.
Okay, how does that play out?
Well, when they finally achieve a massive income, they feel a deep psychological imperative to visibly prove to the world and to their families that they are better off than their parents were.
And unfortunately, the only way society knows how to measure better off is through visible markers of consumption. Nobody can see your diversified Vanguard portfolio or your intentionally defective grantor trust.
Right, you can't drive a trust fund to a dinner party.
Exactly. But everyone can see the G-Wagon in the driveway and the Rolex on your wrist.
Precisely. The book highlights a prime archetype of this, a hypothetical high earner named Teddy Friend. He came from a blue-collar background, hit the highest tax brackets, and immediately converted all of his capital into status markers. He has the sprawling estate, the boats, the luxury cars.
So to everyone looking at him, he's incredibly wealthy.
Oh, to the outside observer, he has totally made it. But mechanically, his balance sheet is a disaster. He is entirely dependent on his next massive paycheck to service the debt and the carrying costs of his lifestyle. If his income stops for 6 months, his entire empire collapses.
Wow. I have an analogy for this, and tell me if you think this tracks. It feels like earning a massive income without a corresponding accumulation strategy is like running on a treadmill.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You get a huge promotion, so you crank up the speed. But because of these sociological pressures, you start buying the $400 designer running shoes, the imported compression gear, and the $80 titanium water bottles just to look the part of an elite runner.
Oh, that's good.
You are sweating, your heart rate is maxed out, you are running faster and faster, but you are not actually moving forward a single inch. You are in the exact same geographic location financially. You just look wildly more expensive while you sweat.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it perfectly highlights the core delusion of the UAW. They view their high income as an endlessly renewable resource.
Like it'll never run out.
Right. They treat their cash flow like a river that will never experience a drought. So instead of capturing the water to build a reservoir, which is true wealth, they just build bigger, more expensive water wheels that require a constant, massive current just to keep turning.
Okay, so that perfectly frames the UAW trap. Now let's pivot to the other side. Let's look at the PAWs, the ultra-wealthy, the family offices. If they are not running on the treadmill, what exact machine are they building? Let's dive into the cash flow and asset allocation strategies outlined by Pantheon Investments.
The Pantheon model fundamentally shifts the objective from consumption to architectural tax mitigation and passive compounding. They outline a four-phase cash flow cycle that UHNW ultra-high net worth individuals use to permanently escape the treadmill. Phase one is value creation.
Right, which means generating capital. But the source notes they prefer doing this through private business ownership rather than a W-2 salary. Why is a W-2 so toxic to the ultra-wealthy?
Because a W-2 salary is the most highly taxed, least flexible form of income in existence. You generate the value, the government takes its highest possible cut immediately off the top, and you get whatever's left.
It's extremely inefficient.
It is. With a business, you generate the value, you deduct all of your operational expenses, and you're only taxed on the net profit. But more importantly, a business generates enterprise value, an asset you can eventually sell or borrow against.
Okay, so they create the value in phase one. But phase two is where they diverge from the UAWs. The UAW takes that capital and buys the depreciating luxury car. What does the family office do in phase two?
Phase two is purchasing tangible assets. They immediately deploy that created capital into working income-producing assets. We are looking at multifamily real estate, self-storage syndications, energy infrastructure, or private equity stakes.
And this leads directly into phase three, which to me is where the real alchemy happens. Tax offsets.
Oh, this is the critical mechanism. By purchasing those specific tangible assets, they unlock massive legal depreciation and paper losses.
How does that work in practice?
Well, for example, through cost segregation studies on a commercial real estate property, they can accelerate the depreciation of the building's components. They take those massive paper losses and apply them against the actual capital they created in phase one.
So they're essentially double dipping in the best way possible. They made the money, they used the money to buy a valuable asset, and the mere act of buying the asset creates a tax shield that protects the original money from the IRS.
Exactly. Which brings us to phase four, generating passive income. The asset they acquired in phase two is now throwing off regular cash flow.
It's beautiful.
It is. So they have protected their initial capital, acquired an appreciating asset, and created a new, totally independent stream of income. It is a rinse and repeat cycle.
But I'm looking at the Altrada data, and it seems to completely contradict that model. Let's look at the actual numbers here.
Okay, let's look at it.
The Altrada report analyzes the global UHNW population, which they define as individuals with a net worth over $30 million. As of mid-2025, there are 510,810 of these individuals globally, controlling a staggering $59.8 trillion in wealth.
It's a massive concentration of capital. To put that in perspective, 500,000 people control roughly the equivalent of the combined GDPs of the United States and China.
Which is just mind-blowing. But here's where I need you to reconcile this for me. The Altrada data states that across all generations, 35 to 45% of their portfolios are held in liquid assets, cash, fixed income, public equities. If the Pantheon strategy is the holy grail, and they are supposed to be deploying everything into tangible assets to get tax offsets, why is almost half of their $59.8 trillion just sitting in liquid assets? That feels like financial suicide in an inflationary environment.
That is a brilliant observation, and it requires us to understand the concept of tiered liquidity. They are not holding 45% in low-yield checking accounts.
Obviously not.
Right. That liquid bucket includes public equities, municipal bonds, and highly structured fixed income instruments. But more importantly, the cash they do hold is not idle. It is strategic. They require massive liquid reserves to quickly capitalize on distress in the private markets.
Like having a war chest.
Exactly. If a multifamily real estate deal goes sideways and needs an immediate capital injection, or if a competitor goes bankrupt and can be acquired for pennies on the dollar, they cannot wait 90 days to liquidate a commercial building. They need immediate deployable capital.
Ah, okay. So it's not a contradiction. It's a balance sheet requirement to feed the tangible asset machine. But the Altrada data also points out a massive structural generational shift happening right now. The older cohorts, the boomers, still hold heavy allocations in public equities. But the next gen, Gen Z and millennials, who are set to inherit this wealth, are playing a completely different game.
The shift is profound. By 2040, Gen X and the next gen will control 80% of the global UHNW population, and they have fundamentally lost faith in the traditional 60-40 public equity and bond portfolio. The data shows they only hold about 30 to 35% in public equities.
So where is all that capital going?
They are aggressively expanding into real estate and luxury tangible assets, pushing that allocation up to 20 to 25%. Furthermore, they are doubling the allocation to alternative assets compared to their parents. They hold 10 to 15% in hedge funds, venture capital, and digital assets.
Why the sudden shift to alternatives? Is it just a younger demographic chasing higher yields, or is there a macro thesis behind it?
Oh, it is entirely driven by macro forces. This generation has grown up in an environment of constant geopolitical instability, rampant inflation, and rapid digital transformation. They view public markets as overly correlated and manipulated by central bank policies.
So they want out of the traditional system.
Therefore, they are seeking assets that offer absolute returns uncorrelated to the S&P 500, alongside hard assets that serve as true inflation hedges. Plus, there is a massive mandate for ESG, environmental, social, and governance and impact investing. They want their capital to yield returns while simultaneously driving technological or environmental solutions.
Okay, so we see what the people with $50 million are doing. They are moving into private equity, venture capital, and complex real estate syndications. But for the listener who wants to mimic this family office style of asset allocation, how do they do that without getting slaughtered? Because I can imagine a high-earning dentist deciding to suddenly allocate 20% of their net worth into a highly illiquid venture capital fund just to copy a billionaire and it blowing up in their face.
And that scenario is exactly what Citi Private Bank defines as competency risk.
Competency risk. I love the sound of that, but break down the mechanics. What is it?
Well, competency risk is the danger of a fundamental mismatch between the complexity of your financial strategy and your actual internal capability to execute it. A billionaire family office has an entire floor of analysts doing deep dive due diligence on that venture capital front. They have tax attorneys structuring the entry and risk managers hedging the exposure.
It's like deciding you want to race in Formula One because you can afford to buy a really fast car, but you don't actually know how to handle the G-forces, you don't understand the aerodynamics, and crucially, you don't have a pit crew. You are just a rich guy in a fast car about to hit a wall at 200 miles an hour.
Exactly. That's exactly it. When retail investors or even lower-tier millionaires try to blindly copy UHNW allocations without the institutional infrastructure, they expose themselves to catastrophic losses. They get locked into illiquid investments for 10 years without understanding the capital call requirements, or they mismanage the tax implications of K-1 distributions from private partnerships.
So how does the listener mitigate competency risk? How do they build the pit crew?
Citi emphasizes that the foundational mechanism for mitigating this risk is the creation of an investment policy statement, or an IPS. This is the cornerstone document of any legitimate family office. It is not just a vague list of goals. It is a legally binding behavioral governor for your capital.
A behavioral governor. I like that. What are the actual mechanics of an IPS? What goes into it?
An IPS explicitly defines your true risk tolerance, not just your theoretical appetite for risk during a bull market, but the exact maximum drawdown your portfolio can sustain before your financial goals are compromised.
It forces you to be honest.
Yes. It establishes strict, mathematically driven rules for your asset allocation targets. For example, it dictates that you will hold 60% global equities, 20% real estate, and 20% fixed income. And most importantly, it outlines the precise triggers for rebalancing.
Let me hazard a guess here. The real power of the IPS isn't the asset allocation itself. It's the fact that it completely removes human emotion from the equation during a crisis.
Exactly.
If the market crashes 30%, you don't have to sit there paralyzed with fear, wondering if you should sell everything and move to cash. You just open the IPS and it says, equities have dropped below our 50% threshold. Sell fixed income and buy more equities to rebalance. It forces you to buy low and sell high mechanically.
That is precisely the power of the IPS. It prevents the reactive, emotion-driven decisions that destroy wealth. It aligns your daily actions with your long-term structural reality.
Okay, let's transition to the biggest threat to that structural reality right now. We talked earlier about UHNW individuals holding liquid assets as dry powder, but the Investbank report explicitly warns against something called the liquidity trap. If having cash is strategic, how does it become a trap?
The liquidity trap occurs when conservative investors, terrified of market volatility, park massive, disproportionate amounts of their capital in low-yielding, highly liquid accounts like basic savings or money market accounts, believing they are preserving their wealth.
Just burying it in the backyard, essentially.
Right. They view the nominal value of their cash, say $1 million, and feel secure because the number isn't fluctuating.
But the nominal value is an illusion.
Completely. Because they are ignoring the silent, compounding destruction of inflation. If inflation is running at an average of 3 to 4% annually, and their cash is yielding 1%, they are guaranteed to lose 2 to 3% of their purchasing power every single year.
It's a slow bleed.
It is not a theoretical risk. It is an absolute mathematical certainty. They are locking in a negative real return.
And the Investbank data points out the opportunity cost as well. By hoarding that cash, they are missing out on the historical 8 to 12% annualized returns generated by alternative assets or private credit.
Furthermore, they're walking into a massive tax inefficiency. The meager interest income generated by a basic savings account is taxed at ordinary income rates, which are the highest possible marginal rates. Contrast that with capital gains from equity investments, which benefit from significantly lower preferential tax rates.
Okay, so if the ultra-wealthy need liquidity, but they absolutely refuse to fall into the liquidity trap, how do they solve the equation? How do they protect the capital from inflation and taxes simultaneously?
This is where we get into the heavy-hitting tax strategies provided by CMP. The overarching goal of the UHNW is not necessarily to reduce their gross income. Their goal is to fundamentally change the character of their income in the eyes of the IRS.
Changing the character of the income. That is the secret sauce. Let's dig deep into the mechanics of this. We all know the basics we know about maxing out a 401k or a 403b to get the tax deferral. I don't think we need to spend time explaining what a 401k is to this audience, but what are the advanced, highly strategic tools they're using beyond the basic retirement accounts?
Well, the most potent yet aggressively underutilized tool for changing the character of income is the Health Savings Account, or HSA. But the wealthy do not use an HSA for its intended purpose.
Right. The intended purpose is to put pre-tax money in and use it to pay for your kids' braces or copay at the doctor. But that's a UAW move. How does the family office use an HSA?
They utilize it as a stealth, triple tax advantaged investment vehicle. If you're enrolled in a high-deductible health plan, the IRS allows you to contribute to an HSA. The contributions are tax-deductible, lowering your current AGI.
Okay, that's advantage one.
Right. Then the capital inside the account can be invested in the market, where it compounds entirely tax-free. And the distributions, if used for qualified medical expenses, are completely tax-free. It is the only account in the U.S. tax code that offers this triple advantage.
But here's where the mechanics get wild. The wealthy fully fund the HSA every year, but when they actually incur a medical expense, say a $5,000 surgery, they do not touch the HSA money.
Exactly. They pay for that $5,000 surgery out of pocket from their regular cash flow. They keep the receipt, and they let the $5,000 inside the HSA stay invested in the S&P 500. They let it compound tax-free for 20, 30, or 40 years.
Because there's no time limit on when you can reimburse yourself.
Precisely. 3 decades later, when that original $5,000 has compounded into $50,000, they can pull out the original $5,000 completely tax-free by producing that 30-year-old receipt.
That is just brilliant.
And the remaining $45,000 of pure growth can also be accessed for future medical costs, or after age 65, it can be withdrawn for any reason and treated just like a traditional IRA. It is a phenomenal mechanism for sheltering capital.
That is amazing. Now, what about dealing with massive, sudden spikes in income? Let's say a listener has an IPO year or they sell their private business and suddenly they have an extra $2 million hitting their W-2. If they just take the cash, the IRS is going to annihilate them. How do they change the character of that massive spike?
One of the most effective strategies outlined by the experts at CMP is the use of a donor-advised fund, or a DAF. A DAF allows you to decouple the timing of your tax deduction from the timing of your actual charitable grants.
I am going to hazard a guess on the mechanics here. If I have that $2 million liquidity event, I could just write a massive check to a DAF to get the deduction. But the smarter move would be to fund the DAF with highly appreciated stock, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because if I sell the stock, I pay capital gains. But if I transfer the stock directly into the DF, I avoid the capital gains tax entirely, and I get to take a charitable deduction for the full fair market value of that stock on the day I transferred it.
You absolutely nailed the mechanics, and the deduction limits are substantial. You can deduct the fair market value of appreciated assets, up to 30% of your adjusted gross income, or up to 60% of your AGI if you are contributing cash. So in your massive income year, you front-load the DF. You take the massive six-figure tax deduction immediately, which blunts the impact of your liquidity event.
But the money isn't gone to charity immediately. It's sitting in the DF, which I control.
Correct. The capital sits in the DF where it invested and grows tax-free. And over the next 10, 20, or 30 years, you act as the advisor to the fund, slowly distributing grants to the charities of your choice. You secured the tax benefit exactly when you needed it mathematically, but you retain control over the philanthropic deployment.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because these strategies, the HSAs, the DFs, the cost segregation, they are powerful for a single lifetime. But the Financial Planning Association source highlights a looming macro event. They estimate that $85 trillion is expected to transfer to heirs and charities by 2045.
The greatest wealth transfer in human history.
Exactly. Yet, historically, 60% of families exhaust their wealth by the second generation, and 90% lose it by the third.
It is a staggering destruction of capital. And the primary culprits are a lack of financial education for the heirs and the brutal friction of the estate and gift tax system.
And this is where we have to look at the advanced legal structures. The FPA report brings up a quote from Judge Learned Hand from a 1934 tax case that perfectly encapsulates the UHNW philosophy. He stated, "There is nothing sinister in so arranging affairs as to keep taxes as low as possible. Everyone does it, rich and poor alike, and all do right, for nobody owes any public booty to pay more than the law demands."
That is the guiding ethos. You have no legal or moral obligation to leave a tip for the IRS.
So how do they arrange their affairs? The source mentions acronyms that sound like a foreign language to most people, GRATs and IDGTs. Let's not just define what these are, let's break down the exact mathematical mechanics of how they operate. Let's start with a GRAT.
A GRAT stands for a grantor retained annuity trust. It is an estate freezing mechanism designed to transfer massive explosive asset growth to the next generation completely free of gift and estate taxes.
Let's run a scenario so I can visualize this. Let's say I'm a founder and I hold $10 million in pre-IPO shares of my tech company. I know this company is going public in 2 years and those shares are going to be worth $50 million. If I hold them, and heaven forbid I pass away, my estate is going to get hit with a 40% estate tax on that $50 million. That's $20 million gone. How does a GRAT stop that?
Okay, so you take those $10 million in shares and transfer them into a GRAT for a specific term, let's say 3 years. The trust agreement states that you, the grantor, will receive an annuity payment back from the trust every year. The mathematical trick is that the annuity payments are calculated to exactly equal the initial $10 million value of the shares, plus a very small nominal interest rate set by the IRS, known as the Section 7520 hurdle rate.
Okay, so the IRS sets a hurdle rate. Let's say right now that rate is 4%.
Exactly, because the present value of the annuity payments you're going to receive exactly equals the value of the assets you put in. The IRS views the mathematical value of the gift to your heirs as zero. This is known as a zeroed-out Cherokee or a Walton GRAT. You use exactly zero of your lifetime gift tax exemption.
But wait, if I am just getting my $10 million back plus 4% interest, where's the benefit to my kids?
The benefit lies in the explosive growth above that 4% hurdle rate. Over those 3 years, your company goes public, and the assets inside the trust explode from $10 million to $50 million. The trust pays you back your $10 million plus the 4% interest, but the remaining nearly $40 million of pure appreciation passes to your beneficiaries completely free of gift and estate taxes.
Wow. That is an architectural masterpiece. You have legally isolated the seed, taken it back, and given away the entire future orchard completely tax-free. You froze the value of the asset in your taxable estate at $10 million, while the actual wealth transferred was $40 million.
Precisely. But as powerful as a GIA is, it does have a mortality risk. If you die before the 3-year term is up, the assets are pulled back into your taxable estate. That is why many family offices utilize an even more sophisticated structure, the IDGT.
The Intentionally Defective Grantor Trust. I have always found this name hilarious. Why on earth would you pay a team of lawyers hundreds of thousands of dollars to build you a trust that is intentionally defective?
Because the defect is a highly calculated loophole in the intersection of the income tax code and the estate tax code. An IDGT is drafted so that it is considered a completed transfer for estate tax purposes. The moment the asset goes into the IDGT, it is permanently removed from your taxable estate. However, the trust includes specific provisions, including the intentional defects that cause the IRS to treat the trust and you, the grantor, as the exact same entity for income tax purposes.
I want to use a metaphor here to make sure I understand the mechanics. It sounds like the IDGT is a one-way financial mirror. From the perspective of the estate tax division of the IRS, they look in the mirror and they cannot see the assets at all. The assets are gone, safely given to the heirs. But from the perspective of the income tax division, they look through the exact same mirror and they see you holding the assets perfectly clearly.
That is one of the best metaphors for an IDGT I have ever heard. It is exactly a one-way mirror. And the mechanics of how you get the asset into the trust are crucial. You don't just gift it. You sell the highly appreciating asset to the IDGT in exchange for a promissory note that pays you a low interest rate over time.
But wait, if I sell a $10 million asset, I have to pay a massive capital gains taxes on the sale.
Not with an IDGT. Because the income tax division looks through the mirror and sees you and the trust as the same taxpayer, the IRS views it as you selling the asset to yourself. You cannot trigger a capital gain by selling something to yourself, so the sale is completely tax-free.
Okay. The asset is safely inside the trust, growing outside my estate. But because I'm still the owner for income tax purposes, when that trust generates millions of dollars in dividends or capital gains, who pays the tax bill?
You do. You, the grantor, are legally required to pay all the income taxes generated by the trust's assets out of your own personal separate funds.
I'm looking at this data and it doesn't add up. Why is paying a massive tax bill out of my own pocket a good strategy? Isn't the whole point to mitigate taxes?
It is the ultimate tax mitigation strategy because of the compounding math. By paying the trust's tax burden out of your own pocket, you are allowing the assets inside the trust to compound with zero tax drag. A tax-free compounding engine will absolutely obliterate a taxable portfolio over 20 years.
Right, because there's no leakage.
Furthermore, Every dollar you spend paying the trust's taxes is essentially a backdoor tax-free gift to your heirs. You are enriching the trust without using a single penny of your lifetime gift tax exemption because the IRS forces you to pay that tax anyway.
It is truly a financial superpower. You are effectively burning down your own taxable estate to pay the taxes for your heirs' tax-free compounding machine. It is brilliant. But let's take a breath, because these structures, the GRATs, the IDGTs, the complex promissory notes, they are mathematically flawless. But none of this architecture matters if the human operating the machinery is flawed. And this brings us to Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
Yes. Housel introduces a concept that is critical for anyone trying to implement these strategies. He argues that wealth accumulation is not a math problem, it is a behavioral problem. You can have the most exquisitely drafted IDGT on the planet, but if your ego, your pride, or your fear overrides your strategy, you will lose it all.
He makes a fascinating distinction between building a rational financial plan and building a reasonable financial plan. Logically, you would think you want a perfectly rational plan. But Housel says a strictly rational plan is actually dangerous. Why is being mathematically rational a vulnerability?
Because a strictly rational plan assumes the investor is an emotionless algorithm. A rational spreadsheet might dictate that a 35-year-old should be leveraged to the hilt and 100% allocated to small-cap emerging market equities because, historically, over a 40-year horizon, that specific allocation generates the highest statistical yield.
Right, the math supports it perfectly.
The math supports it, but the human nervous system does not. A rational plan completely ignores the reality of a 2008-style financial crisis. When that highly leveraged 100% equity portfolio drops by 45% in 6 weeks, the rational math goes out the window. The human investor stops sleeping, starts panicking, and inevitably capitulates, selling all their assets at the absolute bottom of the market just to stop the psychological pain.
So a rational plan essentially guarantees its own failure because it pushes the human past their breaking point.
Exactly. Housel advocates for a pretty reasonable plan. A reasonable plan acknowledges human frailty. A reasonable plan might dictate holding a significantly larger cash buffer than is mathematically optimal. That cash is technically a drag on returns, but it provides an invaluable psychological dividend. It allows the investor to sleep soundly during a market crash, preventing them from interrupting the compounding process of their equities.
The optimal plan isn't the one that yields the highest theoretical return. It's the one you can actually adhere to when the financial world is on fire. And Housel also points out that our psychology gets completely compromised when we start taking financial cues from people who are playing a fundamentally different game.
This is the danger of the modern, hyper-connected financial environment. Let's look at a 55-year-old investor. Their primary objective is capital preservation and generating a steady, inflation-adjusted yield for a retirement that is 5 years away. But they log onto social media and see a 24-year-old day trader aggressively leveraging options contracts on a speculative tech stock and posting a 400% gain.
The 55-year-old experiences massive FOMO, the fear of missing out. They feel inadequate, so they abandon their IPS, take a chunk of their retirement capital, and try to replicate the 24-year-old's trade.
And it is a catastrophic error because they are playing completely different games. The 24-year-old has a 40-year time horizon. If that speculative options trade goes to absolute zero, they have 4 decades of human capital and W-2 income to recover. The 55-year-old has 5 years. If they take a total loss, their retirement is permanently destroyed.
You cannot adopt the tactics of a player in a different game without absorbing their specific risks. And to truly understand what happens when psychology completely fails, when behavior overrides both math and logic, we have to look at the Celeb Spot documentary case studies. We're going to look at the mechanics of the Hollywood trap. We're talking about aggregate examples of chart-topping musicians, heavyweight boxing champions, and box office stars who burned through hundreds of millions of dollars.
The scale of the wealth destruction is breathtaking.
Right.
We're talking about individuals who generated more capital in 5 years than most successful corporations do in a decade. And yet, their financial autopsy reveals a completely predictable mechanical failure.
So what are the exact cash flow mechanics of losing $300 million? It takes effort to lose that much money.
The primary mechanism of failure is the lethal combination of project-based revenue and continuous compounding expenses. Consider an A-list actor who signs a contract for a $20 million movie role. To a UAW mentality, they instantly feel $20 million richer.
I think that's incomplete, though. They don't actually see $20 million. Right?
Exactly. Let's break down the actual cash flow. The talent agency takes 10%. The personal manager takes 10%. The entertainment lawyer takes 5%. So right off the top, 25% of the gross is gone. They are left with $15 million. Then, the IRS and the California Franchise Tax Board take roughly 50% of the remaining capital. The actor actually nets somewhere around $7 to $8 million.
But their psychology is anchored to the $20 million headline, so they spend based on the gross, not the net.
Precisely. And what do they buy? They do not buy tangible income-producing assets. They buy massive liabilities that require continuous capital injections. They purchase a $25 million primary residence, requiring a massive mortgage. They buy a fleet of exotic cars that depreciate by 30% the moment the tires hit the street. And critically, they hire an entourage of 12 people on full-time salaries just to manage their daily lives.
So here is the trap. The $20 million check was a one-time, project-based spike. They might not book another movie for 3 years. But the carrying costs of the mansion, the property taxes, the insurance on the cars, and the payroll for the entourage, those are continuous, relentless monthly expenses.
Yes, an arithmetic certainty of bankruptcy. Their monthly burn rate vastly exceeds the amortized value of their project revenue. And when the IRS inevitably audits them because they failed to set aside cash for quarterly estimated taxes, the entire house of cards collapses. They are forced to liquidate their depreciated assets at a massive loss just to stay out of federal prison.
Now contrast that chaotic, emotional disaster with how a highly disciplined family office handles a severe liquidity crisis. Let's look at the case study from the InvestBank report regarding the asset-rich, cash-poor family during a sudden market downturn.
This is a masterclass in applying tiered liquidity and mechanical strategy over emotion. This family possessed immense wealth, but it was almost entirely deployed in working assets, commercial real estate syndications, operating businesses, and illiquid private equity funds. When a sudden, severe macroeconomic shock occurred, they faced an immediate multi-million-dollar capital call on one of their private equity commitments.
So they were caught in the liquidity trap from the opposite side. They had massive net worth, but zero cash to meet the obligation. If I'm in that situation, my panic response is to immediately sell whatever I can to raise the cash.
And that is what an undisciplined investor would do. They would fire sale their private equity stake on the secondary market at a 40% discount, destroying millions of dollars of equity just to raise cash. But this family utilized a sophisticated leverage tool, a securities-backed line of credit, or an SBLOC.
Walk me through the mechanics of an SBLOC.
An SBLOC allows an investor to pledge their existing, highly appreciated portfolio, like their public equities or even certain private assets, as collateral to secure a revolving line of credit from a private bank.
So they don't have to sell the asset and trigger a massive capital gains tax event.
Exactly. They retain full ownership of the compounding asset. The bank extends them the millions of dollars in cash they need to meet the capital call. And because the loan is over-collateralized by their assets, the interest rate is incredibly low, perhaps SOFR plus 1.5%.
So they're engaging in positive arbitrage. They borrow money at 6% to keep an asset that is compounding at 12%, all while avoiding a 20% capital gains tax. They use strategic debt to bridge the liquidity gap and protect the golden goose.
It is the precise application of the tools we discussed, executed without a trace of panic.
And speaking of executing without panic, we cannot talk about cash management without analyzing the ultimate case study. Let's look at Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. In early 2025, it was widely reported that Berkshire was sitting on a record $347 billion in cash and short-term U.S. treasuries. Now, based on everything we discussed from the InvestBank report regarding the liquidity trap, how inflation silently destroys the purchasing power of cash, isn't Buffett essentially losing billions of dollars a year in real terms by holding that much cash? Is the Oracle of Omaha making a colossal mistake?
It is a phenomenal question, and to answer it, we have to look at the concept of optionality. Yes, mathematically, inflation is eroding a fraction of that $347 billion. Buffett is fully aware of the math, but he is not holding that cash out of fear or ignorance, which is the hallmark of the UAW liquidity trap. He is holding it as dry powder.
Meaning he is waiting for the structural integrity of the market to fail.
Exactly. Buffett looks at the macroeconomic environment, evaluates the valuation multiples of potential acquisition targets, and determines that the market is irrationally exuberant. He refuses to overpay for assets. So he accepts the temporary calculated drag of inflation on his cash reserves because he understands that extreme liquidity is the ultimate competitive weapon during a systemic crisis.
It's the ultimate patience. While everyone else is fully deployed and leveraged to the hilt, he is sitting on a mountain of ammunition. When the inevitable panic hits and the over-leveraged UAWs are forced to liquidate their companies to meet margin calls, Buffett is the only one in the room with the $347 billion to buy those prime assets for pennies on the dollar. He weaponizes liquidity.
It is the difference between cash as a life raft and cash as a battleship.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have deconstructed the UAW and PA math, we explored the Pantheon cash flow cycle, analyzed the generational shift in the Ultrada data, unraveled the complex mechanics of HSAs, DFs, GRATs, and IDGTs, and dissected the behavioral psychology that makes or breaks these structures. It's a lot to process.
It really is. Now let's bring this entirely home for the listener. The Wealthnetic mission is about action. If I'm listening to this right now, how do I translate these billionaire institutional strategies into everyday steps? What is the practical roadmap I can execute today?
Step 1 is absolute mathematical clarity. You must calculate your wealth equation today. Do not guess. Run the numbers. Multiply your age by your pre-tax income and divide by 10. You need to confront the reality of whether you are currently operating as a prodigious accumulator of wealth or an under-accumulator of wealth.
And if the listener runs the math and realizes they are a UAW, what is the immediate corrective action? You have to identify and ruthlessly plug the leaks in your system. You have to audit your lifestyle creep. Are you buying liabilities to satisfy the better-than theory? Furthermore, you must eliminate what Stanley calls economic outpatient care. If you are constantly subsidizing the lifestyles of your adult children paying their mortgages, buying their cars, you are not only draining your own balance sheet, but the data proves you are actively destroying their ability to ever become paws themselves.
Stop the bleeding. Okay, step 2, implement tiered liquidity.
Exactly. You must escape the liquidity trap, determine your exact monthly burn rate, and keep 3 to 6 months of absolute living expenses in highly liquid, safe accounts. That is your defensive buffer. But every single dollar above that threshold must be deployed into wealth-building vehicles, whether that is maxing out retirement accounts, acquiring income-producing real estate, or aggressively paying down high-interest consumer debt. You must shift your identity from a consumer of goods to an owner of compounding assets.
Step 3 is architectural. Change the character of your income. You don't need a Wall Street legal team to start pulling these levers.
You do not. You have powerful tools readily available. Audit your benefits package. If you have access to a high-deductible health plan, open the HSA. Max out the contributions, pay your current medical expenses out of pocket, and let that account act as a triple tax-advantaged compounding machine for the next 3 decades. If you anticipate a major liquidity event, sit down with a CPA and structure a donor-advised fund to mitigate the tax impact while securing your philanthropic legacy. Use the legal framework provided to protect your created value.
And finally, step 4, draft your investment policy statement.
This is the ultimate behavioral governor. You need to write down explicitly what your financial objectives are, what your verified risk tolerance is, and the exact asset allocation you are committing to. And crucially, write down why you are building this wealth. Is it to buy your time back? Is it to ensure generational security? When the next macroeconomic crisis hits and the media is inciting panic, you do not look at social media. You pull out your IPS, you read the logical, reasonable rules you wrote for yourself when you were calm, and you execute the plan without emotion.
I absolutely love that. Read your own rules.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, executing just one of these steps today fundamentally rewires your financial trajectory. It moves you off the treadmill of visible consumption and places you firmly on the path of architectural wealth creation.
That is the perfect synthesis. To recap the core thesis of our entire deep dive today, living a highly visible, rich lifestyle is absolutely not the same thing as possessing true wealth. Looking expensive almost always correlates with being financially fragile. True wealth is silent. It is systematic. It is ruthlessly intentional. It is about generating enterprise value, allocating assets with mathematical precision, mastering the tax code to protect your capital, and above all, building the psychological resilience to never sabotage your own compounding machine.
It is about building a permanent balance sheet that outlives your W-2.
Exactly. If the mechanics and strategies we unpacked in this deep dive sparked a shift in your perspective, please hit that subscribe button on the Wealthnetic channel so we can continue bringing you these institutional insights. Share this deep dive with a friend or colleague who might need a reality check on their own wealth equation, or who needs a little push to finally get off the treadmill. And absolutely explore the original source materials we linked to continue your own education.
There's always more to learn.
Always. We always like to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. So take a hard look around your life right now. Look at the vehicle sitting in your driveway. Look at the recurring subscription sitting in your credit card. Look at the square footage of the house you are sitting in. Are the things you are actively exchanging your capital for today actually buying your future freedom and independence? Or are they just an incredibly expensive audition for a lifestyle you cannot mathematically afford to maintain?
Keep building the balance sheet.
See you next time.